Star Parker, and it was a busy week in Washington, D.C. While the national prayer breakfast happened here on Capitol Hill, a tax bill in the House. We're going to talk to our distinguished panel about that a little later. A border bill in the Senate, impeachment in the House. But first, Israel. I want to talk about Israel. A lot of us are still concerned that this is going on further and longer than we wanted to think during our prayer time 3 months ago. And we're going to talk to a specialist later about that. We had a couple of activities here in Washington this week. One, the embassy showed the footage from October 7th. The Israeli embassy showed the footage. I don't know how many people will have endless nightmares that were in that showing of what really went on October 7th. Another thing that happened this week is that rabbis and pastors, for the first time in history of Washington, D.C., got together for an advocacy day and went and knocked on the doors of their Senate leaders and their House members together to talk about October 7th and where we go from here. I'm going to talk a little later with Dan Raviv. Some of you remember him, our CBS specialist. He was a reporter with CBS, and he's also a specialist on Middle Eastern affairs. So I want to bring him back and update us a little bit today. And then we'll get into some panel discussion about what is going on there, and then we'll have some good of the order right after this. This is the Israel Advocacy Day. They are probably very tired. Started early this morning, went on Capitol Hill, and I've grabbed a pastor and rabbi.
I came here because I think that the Judeo-Christian values that allow us to have clarity when it comes to Israel and its struggle with Hamas is shared, and it's a moral calling to come and speak up on behalf of God and the truth.
Today was about bringing us together for the moral cause for Israel. For their rights to exist and their right to defend themselves, to live free from harm.
Thanks, gentlemen, for speaking with us here on BlackCommunityNews.com, Cure America. I keep thinking that my guest, my very special guest, Dan Raviv, is going to be a good friend of mine, but every time I see him, he gives me bad news. And I was going to get an update from the last time that you were here. Everything you said came true in the Middle East, and I just want to get into that. But before we do, why you're going to be my friend is you looked at our book, The State of Black America, and inside of our book, it's a tome here at Cure. Our second edition is coming out in a month. You noticed we had a scripture in there, and you told me something fascinating about that scripture, and I want to know because I think that what we're seeing, if you can call it a blessing, out of such tragedy of October the 7th, what we're seeing is a relationship getting opportunity. I don't know how to even say it between evangelical Christians and Jews. We're getting to know each other. I have met so many personal people now, like even yourself, that we're expressing different places other than what we normally would do in niceties. And you told me something about that scripture. I want to hear it because every evangelical is going to know that scripture from Proverbs because, you know, the guys always like to tell them that they're looking for a virtuous Proverbs 31 woman. Tell me what you told me.
Well, here's one. I'm Star Parker. Thank you very much for having me again. And so while waiting to go on the air here at Cure America, I indeed did look at your book. It's The State of Black America from the Center for Urban Renewal and Education. And I didn't expect that one of the very first pages would be a quote from the Old Testament, right? A part of the Bible that's familiar to all, to Jewish people, yes, that includes me, and to Christians as well. You're still reading the Old Testament, and here it is, evidence of it. And I didn't expect this, Star. Who can find a woman of valor, for her value is far above rubies? And this is from Proverbs 31:10, and it goes on to say that you don't take the measure of a woman merely by her beauty and grace, but think about her faith and her deeds. And here's something that I told you, Star, before we went on the air, so you wanted me to share it with the viewers, which is that Jewish families at their Friday night dinner, that's the eve of Sabbath. A lot of people know you light 2 candles, you have 1 glass of wine that you usually pass around and have a little bit of a sip and say blessings over candles and wine, but also their family blessings. And so the parents say a blessing over the children that makes reference to the biblical prophets, And in the traditional family that's sitting there, the husband says to the wife in Hebrew, Eshet Chayil, which means a woman of valor, and reads that part of Proverbs, and so it's very familiar to the Jewish family.
Wow.
And to find it here in the state of Black America, I think reminds us of us having a lot in common. And Star, what you pointed out as well, we have an opportunity to build something or renovate something that maybe got forgotten at a time of crisis, because Israel, the state of Israel, and frankly the Jewish people around the world with the rise of anti-Semitism, are feeling a crisis since October, and the more alliances we can form, I think the better.
I think so too. We had an advocacy day here in Washington, D.C. that CURE was a part of, and in the planning stages, we must do more than just the rally that happened a month or so ago with the rabbis and the Jewish community and Christian community coming together. Well, at this one pulled together just a couple of weeks, 20 rabbis, 20 pastors, and 20 or 30 additional people that are saying, let's go and talk to all of the legislators about Israel and their support. Thank them and or encourage them, because things have broken down. So I thank you for this opportunity to talk about where we are now. The last time you were with us, it was fresh. You really made me upset, because you were telling me that this is what could happen, and we have to be watchful for these things, because many of us Christians, we just want to get in, get out. We support Israel, do what you need to do, but it's a lot more complicated than that. And a lot of things that you said came true. I even had to ask you, well, who are the Houthis? And now we know who they are. Now we have 3 American deaths on every night news just in the last few days.
Sure, and the old expression, which I'm sorry is often true in the Middle East, it's going to get worse before it gets better. Now, it can swing to something better and often out of a crisis, but a quick reminder, October 7th, the Hamas faction of the Palestinian people. That's not all the Palestinian people, who frankly have not had their own country ever, and since the 1970s especially, have been demanding sovereign rights. They should have their own country. I think that most of their leaders went about it the wrong way. They hijacked airplanes. They murdered Israeli athletes at the Munich Olympics in 1972. They engaged in terrorism to get attention. Now, they got attention. And so since the 1980s, there was a national movement of the Palestinians. Some diplomats, a lot of violence. In 1993, right here in Washington, Israel and Yasser Arafat, thought of as like the chief terrorist, but he was also their chief leader. They signed a deal on the White House lawn that would be the building blocks toward having a Palestinian country. It's called a Palestinian state next to Israel. Well, that was 30 years ago, and it pretty much fell apart. Some progress.
But it fell apart, Dan, because they walked away. There was an attempt of the American people and even the Jewish people at that time to say, okay, this is not the best situation here, but we are coming out of a crisis. The Holocaust was a major crisis, and we have to do something. And it has been tense since. When do we see progress from the side of the Palestinians and those that would even hire someone like Hamas to now? This is tragic.
Right.
I mean,
they elected Hamas, by the way, in the Gaza Strip in elections that were held in 2006, and then right away there was a civil war, and the more moderate Palestinians were kicked out, killed. That was Palestinian Arabs killing other Palestinian Arabs. So Hamas is dictatorial.
No, we know that,
and
but 2005 was in our lifetimes. At some point, people have to be mature enough to say we have a responsibility over our own lives, and yet we're looking at this particular situation. One of the questions I was able to ask the gentleman from the embassy today at the advocacy day.
An Israeli diplomat.
Yes,
an Israeli.
Oh, did I say that wrong?
Just a gentleman from the embassy.
Oh, no, he's an
Israeli
diplomat. Actually, he's the minister of missions, and it was a great honor to even be in the room and hear from him. And I'm hoping to get him for you guys to hear from him. He's an incredible presenter of what's going on and all the details there. But one of the questions I asked when he said that they were moving now from the north and the middle to the south, because they've done as much as they can, I suppose. It's not finished
within the Gaza Strip.
Within the Gaza Strip, it begged the question. So you guys have moved all the Palestinians to the south. What is going to happen to them now? Egypt's not going to let them in. Are they going to be able to come back north? And the answer is just frankly no. And this is in the middle of finding out that the UN is they don't know which one. Everyone's trying to say, well, there's a lot of workers at the UN. Yeah, but we don't know which one's the terrorist supporter. Then how are you going to trust this
now in a
humanitarian
dictatorial regime like the Gaza Strip, since that year that Hamas took over, again, they won an election and threw out everybody else, became dictators. And in a regime like that, I'm not surprised that Palestinians who get a job for a UN agency in their secret lives are also in league with the dictators and with the party. I'm not surprised. Now, it's
Well,
bad.
it's kind of like what we have on our border. People are breaking the border, so terrorists are breaking it too. So now I get it. Okay.
Yeah, or
so
it could be. And the parallels with the United States
but
are.
I'm gonna back you up again because see, this is where we always have a disagreement. The UN has never seemed to be on Israel's side. So I think that there's more corruption going on than just this is happenstance that a few bad apples got into a humanitarian agency. But go ahead.
Oh,
But
okay. That means that the
bring us
UN
history.
didn't bother to filter them out.
I don't know that the UN would, and that's the difference that you and I have. You give them too much benefit of the doubt, in my opinion, because the UN has been hostile to Israel since the existence of Israel, and they keep letting it go on and on and on, and Israel has always just backed up, put a Band-Aid for a little while, backed up, put a Band-Aid, and now look where we are.
Yeah, now again, the where we are, again, for viewers who forget the key event, and your mention of October 7th, right?
Yes.
It's a massacre or a set of massacres by Hamas men who went into Israel and killed people, beheaded people, raped women, grabbed hostages, took them to Gaza, and little by little, Hamas is killing them little by little in order to torture the Israeli people who are very sensitive to every human life. Now, mind you, Israel is taking a lot of criticism for what war entails because war is ugly.
That's right.
And so the Israelis rolled into Gaza. They are looking for the Hamas leaders. They're not hiding the fact.
There's over 40,000 that they know. This is what the embassy person said.
Oh, that many Hamas fighters. I got you. Yes.
Minister Benjamin said,
Yeah.
therefore, I'm like, wow, first of all, how do they know?
Because they took over because Hamas took over the whole Gaza Strip of 2.2 million people.
Okay.
And so often there was no other job for a young man except join the party, become a militant, get training, and then get trained that you want to kill Jews. Terrible situation. You mentioned the Houthis that I brought up when I was last here.
Yeah, because now we're experiencing them.
Okay, so they are Muslim extremists in the country of Yemen, which is quite far from Israel and the Palestinians. It's way down to the south at the other end of the Red Sea, but they are controlled by Iran. The Houthis of Yemen, who went through a civil war that ended in a stalemate. The Houthis have part of Yemen, and others, the royalists, loyal to the king of Yemen, they have the other half. Anyway, Iran controls the Houthis, gives them everything. And under Iranian orders, the Houthis decided to mess with shipping, to launch missiles, to hijack ships, etc.
But how much of this then is taking place because of Iran? Because that,
yes.
that is the common denominator
Yes.
between Hamas and now you're telling us we have these issues over here, and 100 and something now American spaces have been hit on.
Well, indeed, as you said, 3 American soldiers, 2 women, 1 man were killed. Again, it may get worse before it gets better.
Lord.
And that attack was on a little-known U.S. military base in eastern Jordan, near the border of Syria. What's it there for? To keep an eye on ISIS. You remember those terrible terrorists from a few years ago who were kidnapping and beheading
Westerners. That
Westerners.
everybody can put it all together. We're having trouble putting all these dots together.
But
and the
no, Star,
now,
I praise you from our last chat here that in the end you said Iran seems to be behind all the trouble, whether it's in eastern Jordan, whether it's in Yemen, whether it's in Syria, or Hamas also was getting aid from the Iranians.
But now,
so Iran's
they're
the problem.
us now. They are the problem. So now they're like, come get us, come get us. They're tempting. And yet we have a Biden administration that keeps saying, we don't want to escalate. They're escalating.
Nobody wants to attack Iran itself, a country of more than 70 million people with a lot of weapons. It's a big country, Iran. So instead we have this. It is true. They have a strange way of attacking us. They use those proxies, the people who take orders from Iran. The attack that killed the 3 American soldiers, probably that drone was launched from a corner of Iraq that the Iranian-backed terrorists are in. So Iran doesn't act from Iran. We don't hit back at Iran. And I know, Star,
so we
your
got to
theory.
take out the little guys around.
It seems that way to me. You don't want to have a direct act of war country to country, but
no, don't
Star,
say that. I don't, because as we talked
know.
about last time.
Yes. You said go to the heart of the matter.
I think that might end up be where we end up. And I guess my concern is now you have from the alt-right and the alt-left saying, we want to isolate ourselves from all of this.
Well,
We don't want to be a part of any wars.
What a good point. There's so many conservatives in Congress who say, well, you know, we don't want to send lots of money. We don't want to send troops. We don't want to be involved. Let the Middle Easterners sort it out. I really believe that if you let Iranian-backed terrorists do whatever they want, including hitting shipping, which ends up costing all of us, all of our products that are shipped from the Far East and normally go through ships through the Red Sea and the Suez Canal and the Mediterranean, instead have to go around Africa. It all costs more, but it's also a victory for the terrorists. They're eventually going to come after us. So I think the U.S. does have a responsibility. It's for people to decide, you know, to what extent. Right. Attacking Iran may be too far.
Well, but we're here.
And you're right about the left, by the way. I mentioned the right didn't want to get involved, the conservatives, and the left, well, they don't side with Israel. They think Israel is the masters of the occupied territories and that Israel shouldn't get all the U.S. aid it's been getting. Okay. I believe that Israel's been an excellent partner for the U.S.
They are an excellent partner, and there are those. That's why I want to use the word, or let you use the word conservative lightly, because there's something else realigning here. You got the MAGAs, you've got the conservatives that are those that even want a strong national defense, being called outside of their names. They're globalists. They're all these other things. They're rhinos. Because they have that thread to say, we've got to protect our interests, and how you protect your interests is by having a strong military and being there for your allies. So I'm going to ask you a question as a reporter. You're a reporter. I want to ask you a question, not necessarily about the elections, but if you remember, during the tensions coming into the Civil War in America, the Whigs went away because of all those different factions. Are we in that moment where we're seeing such a realigning in the Republican and
here
Democrat?
in the United States? No. Even though there are people who think of running for president on a third-party line, that's what Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is doing, realizing that he can't get the nomination of the Democratic Party. So that's a little...
I don't want to go to the people...
No, but that's a little disruptive influence.
Themselves. No, you call them conservatives, but I don't know that conservatives in a traditional sense would fit the isolationists. So I'm wondering about not the leaders, because, you know, the leaders then we saw Seward, we saw Abraham Lincoln. I'm talking about the people themselves.
Well, I don't think
the people supporting
I was just going to say, bottom line, I don't think we're going to have more than two political parties, because the political parties in the United States are huge machines with huge budgets, the biggest fundraisers, but within each party you're going to have divisions, which we're seeing right now. And on the left, in the Democratic Party, there are a lot of Democrats who are unhappy that old Joe Biden is running again. There's some who would be more leftist-oriented, Bernie Sanders types, AOC in Congress.
But you think that they're going to stay in those parties. I'm going to have you back, because we run out of time too much, and I just like you. And,
it's always so interesting.
My team put some questions together. They wanted to hear from you, but oh well. I'll have to get to them next time.
I just have a couple of very brief tips, which is that your viewers can go to YouTube and see our last chat. Look for Star Parker Dan Raviv. You'll see our last chat, which was about an hour long. You'll learn a lot about the Middle East. And a shameless plug, my latest book is called Spies Against Armageddon. It's how Israel's intelligence services like the Mossad have been combating the chaos. Spies Against Armageddon is a book that I wrote. So there you are.
Armageddon. You know what? We'll have to show you a picture of that. I hope we can find it right away. And you need to know more about it. And Dan, and thank you again. He's going to be back, because, you know, they're saying over there this is going to take a while. So if it's going to take a while, we at Cure America are going to bring you a while, because we have to sort through the noise of the news to find truth on this one. Otherwise, we'll begin to hear the propaganda that's really loud, especially here in Washington, D.C., and then not side with Israel, which I want to do. I'll be right back with my panel, see what they have to say about this. Former Israeli Defense Forces paratrooper Daniel Flesch. Thank you. Welcome to my panel. You'll hear a little bit from Daniel later. I wanted his whole story because it's intriguing, but thank you for coming and joining us on our panel. Some of the other guys have been here every week, and so they have a lot of interesting stories, and so I hope you'll come back after hearing some of those before we came on air.
Thank you, Star.
I heard you involved in some of those discussions, so I'm just not even going to worry about whether you're fit or not, especially Richard. Richard already solved all the problems in the world. Richard Manning, you know, Americans for Limited Government. Richard was telling me, he said, now, you know, I can't really take my title into the black communities when we're doing our outreach, just because when I say Americans for Limited Government, the disproportionate numbers of African Americans that work for government, they might shut down the dialogue before we even get started. But I don't think so.
Well, let's hope not.
Let's hope not. And thanks for being back with us. And then Jonathan, thank you. Jonathan Alexandre, he's been so busy. Liberty Counsel Action, you guys have been busy.
Yeah, it's been incredible work that we're doing. We have cases that we're lobbing up to the Supreme Court. We have testimony that we're giving in state houses all across the country. So we've been on the front lines of a lot of these issues.
Well, because the culture war is inflamed. And, we don't hear about it every day on the headline, but it is still alive and well. And the issues that you guys take on are very important, especially to the Christian communities. And then Marty Dannenfelser, thank you, from CURE. He is our government relations and coalitions here in Washington, D.C. as vice president. So thanks for being on panel again, because it's been a busy week.
Sure has.
So we're going to get into a little bit about the busyness of all of those kind of details after toward the end. I want to first concentrate on Israel. Okay, so Daniel, you're a specialist. You're foreign affairs and on Israel. So I want to ask you. Okay, so now we're looking at an attack in Jordan. Tragically, 3 U.S. troops. What happened there, and what is the potential U.S. response? The president seemed to went silent for a few days.
Yeah, certainly. So what happened in short was there's a small U.S. base on the border in Jordan, near Syria and Iraq, that's been doing counter-ISIS operations for a long time. It's a small base, and there was a drone fired by an Iran proxy organization that targeted and struck the drone. There's different tactical and operational considerations for how and why this drone pierced U.S. defenses. Yeah. But in short, this is a drone that's fired by, like I said, an Iran proxy organization. We also look around the region, talk about the Houthis off of Yemen. Certainly the war Israel's waging with Hamas in the Gaza Strip right now, Hezbollah in Lebanon. It needs to be clear that it's not any one proxy that's the issue. They're all part of the tentacles of the head of the octopus, which is Iran.
Yeah, and that's what we keep hearing, that that's the head of it, the challenges, but then no one wants to go in and just say, take it out. Let's just take it out, because it's gone on too far. And what's getting lost, Richard, is Israel itself. What's the latest news? We're trying to get through Hamas out of existence. And in fact, I sat in one briefing yesterday about Hamas and what the Israelis have been able to do to move through the north, through the middle, and now they're in the south. What's going on there?
Well, first of all, we have to say the Israelis have made a concerted effort to not go eye for an eye. They have been very, very deliberate in trying to avoid civilian casualties, and in fact, have had to fight against Hamas itself to get civilians moved out of the conflict area. Now, but what's happening is the American government is trying to force the Israelis to give benefit to those who've supported Hamas, to Iran and their proxies, by trying to force a state solution where the people who attacked, who killed the civilians, benefit by getting a Palestinian state.
You know what?
It is insane.
It is not only insane, it's too soon. We're seeing the video footage. There are people even in our own country that keep pretending that, that didn't really happen. But we've seen it happen, and I'm telling you, we have nightmares. I have a couple of my team members that said, I'm not even going. I don't want to see it at all. That's how bad it is. And these are men that are saying, we can't look at that. I've seen every horror movie there is, and I can't look at this. And it's true what has happened. So, Jonathan, I have to ask you, to what extent is America being pulled into this? We are dividing ourselves as a nation on a real simple question. Someone was hurt. Our friend was hurt. They want to respond. And like I said, it's not even eye for eye. They are really being focused on how they want to pull this off. What should be our response?
Well, with U.S. hostages still stuck in Gaza, so that's a point. You still have U.S. citizens that are there in Gaza. But to all these skirmishes that are going around in the Middle East, I mean, there is the justification for an engagement. There's proportionality. The U.S. can have a proportional response to any of these attacks. The question is necessity. Is it necessary to U.S. to go, as Richard mentioned, sort of eye for an eye when it comes to these skirmishes and attacks? The fact that we still have to have military bases that are fighting against ISIS, ISIS that was completely decimated under Trump, the fact that we have an Iran that's getting resources funneled to them, either directly through U.S. lifting sanctions or through other exports that we're allowing them to get. The U.S. is making calculated diplomatic decisions through this Biden administration that aren't benefiting America's interests in the Middle East.
But it started to happen. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, certainly we have to have a tactical military response. The question is, if it's going to be proportional, it's certainly justified in how necessary it is. If we're losing American lives, then certainly the trigger has to be pulled in a response that says that American lives are going to engage the United States in responding.
So respond. Why can't we just stop them from doing this? This constant going back and forth. There must be, some of these tunnels that we're seeing are long, and I mean, yesterday they were reporting that one of them is like 500 miles. Come on, this didn't happen under one administration. So this has been a long-term game that they keep hitting. We hit back. We hit back. So Marty, I want to ask you then about the budget, because what's happening now, in particular, but has happened over the course of time, is this voice that we don't want to be globalists. We don't want, it's an isolationist voice that maybe is why there's no consistency in our military to say, here's how we defend. Talk a little bit about the defense budget. I did my column and looked at the defense budget alone is such a small part of our total budget, and our military has been weakened like never before, and now we have scrimmages that we're supposed to respond to. Isn't there a way to just do a comprehensive, we are military, we want to defend our interests, and that means that we need to be strong and have a strong national defense to prevent wars and these little attacks?
Well, correct. Ronald Reagan taught us many years ago that a strong America doesn't start wars, a strong America prevents wars. And we need to realize that we have allies in the world who are important strategic allies for our own interests as well as theirs. And Israel is one of our strongest and most important allies in the world. And there was evil there. There was one side was evil, and they attacked Israel, and they did it in a horrible way with women and children and all kinds of atrocities. And Israel has a right to defend themselves, right, and we should be helping Israel defend themselves. We're not calling for us to put U.S. troops in there, but we need to provide them with military assistance, and we need to provide them with moral assistance, and for the president to be constantly undermining Israel and kind of portraying them as the bad guys in this situation at times is wrong. And it just undermines, and it encourages Hamas and the forces of evil to just keep going.
So that's what's happened of late, because even when the question of Iran, I think, Richard, you would probably know, and you probably know, Daniel, and I just want some discussion that one of the first things that Biden did was start saying, okay, we're going to give you monies again. We're going to lift all of the restrictions and the sanctions that the Trump administration had put in place. And so now here we are. And even to Jonathan's point, why are we still having to be all over the world to where now we have these 3 military dead? I think many Americans are saying, we didn't even know we were still there.
I would say, and quickly on the second point, we'll get to the first, is it's in America's interest to have a presence around the world to ensure that the global order we established after World War II is maintained, an order that we are leading not only politically, economically, military, but also morally as well. Okay. And on the first point, this administration has a fundamentally, I think, inverse view of how you should treat the Iranian threats. They are not partners in the region. They are the enemy in the region, not just against Israel, but other allies we have, and for that matter, the world. Because right now, you have a Middle East that is effectively imploding and becoming extremely destabilized under this administration. Right. And I mentioned the different tentacles that Iran has around the region. The issue is not individually one of them. It's the funding and support they get from Iran. So any strike against them has to be done in a way that is noted to the Iranians that this is coming after you as well.
Well, one of the things I don't think we can miss is under Trump, Iran was identified as the problem. Right. We sanctioned Iran, we choked them out, and we denied them about $100 billion a year in revenue. $100 billion a year. Because of opening up the oil flows and the like, so they can sell their oil. They're $100 billion a year richer today than they were under President Trump, and they're using that money to fund these proxy terrorist groups.
But they must have already been funding them, because this couldn't have happened over 3 years.
Well, they were funding them, but the guy who was the mastermind behind it is a guy named Soleimani, and in a very targeted operation, President Trump authorized our military, which is very good at its job, to go in and kill him. Right. Okay, and that disrupted their operations for a couple of years. But they've been allowed to rebuild those operations. And I'll just use the Houthis as an example in Yemen, because here's what's happened. Here's what the risk that Joe Biden's put us in. The Houthis were designated as a terrorist group under President Trump. Within 1 month of the Biden administration coming into effect, they lifted that designation as a gift to Iran to show we were going to have goodwill to Iran. The Houthis are now firing missiles at cargo ships in the Red Sea, 30% of the world's cargo container traffic travels through the Red Sea, through the Suez Canal. Those ships are now being rerouted around Africa, costing 13 to 15 days of additional traffic time, and with predictions that it's going to create supply chain shortages and increased inflation, because container ship traffic now costs a lot more money than it did before this started happening. And that is directly a result of Joe Biden's policies and trying to appease Iran, and forget that we're the United States of America and we don't have to appease anyone.
You know, you don't want evil represented in our United States government, but what you just defined is evil. These are people that are elected, sitting down the street from us right now, and what you just told me is incredibly tragic. But you know what? I've got a thought on it. So let me pause right here for an important break, and then I want to get a little bit more into Daniel, because you've given us some really insight. But I want to know who you are personally, and I think they might want to know as well. So we're going to hear from Daniel a little bit. We're going to hear from a very important messenger right now. Daniel, we are learning so much from you on this panel. First time you're here. I met you through a friend, a mutual friend who I have known for years. So anytime Paul says, you need to know this person, you took a lot of my time the other day. I didn't get any work done because we just sat and we talked. But more than the discussion that we've just had on the panel, I want to know who you are, and I want our audience to know who you are, because you have a fascinating story pre-October 7th. And then after.
Certainly, Star, and thank you very much for having me today. So, in short, I'm from Chicago, the North Side, huge Cubs fan. And after college, went to the University of Illinois. I went and served in the Israel Defense Forces.
So you're a young American man.
American.
And you went to serve in the Israel Defense Forces.
Yes. So, a couple things there. One is the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces, is a unique military. In many ways, it's the Jewish people's army, in that if you are Jewish, you can then, of a certain age, you can serve in the military without even becoming a citizen of Israel. Now,
wow, is this available for all Jews all over the world?
All Jews all over the world.
Really?
And it's actually not a very foreign concept for actually Americans serving in foreign militaries. Americans did it for the British in right before we entered World War II. There was the Abraham Lincoln Brigade, comprised of Americans that fought in the Spanish Civil War. Of course, there's the French Foreign Legion. So there's other history of Americans serving in foreign militaries. As it comes to Israel, the program, the way in which I served, actually draws its roots from pre-state Israel, meaning the survivors of the Holocaust who went to then mandatory Palestine in the 1940s. They joined the military there, and there's a Hebrew term for it that then translate to volunteers from abroad, which is what I was, a volunteer from abroad.
Well, so why did you do that? You had your life in Chicago.
Certainly.
You're an American young man.
Well, I know we have limited time here, so I'll try to keep it short. But in brief, actually my last year in college, I took Arabic, wanting to have a career in the Foreign Service, wanting to learn more about that part of the world, and that pushed me back to learning and engaging with my Jewish heritage. And I went on
Did you not grow up in your Jewish heritage?
I did, but like many American Jews, after I was bar mitzvahed at 13 years of age, it kind of fell off the table. And Israel was important in my family's home, but it wasn't a central piece of it. And so I really didn't reconnect until college. Actually, again, Arabic pushed me back to learning about Hebrew, learning Judaism. Yeah, I went to Israel over winter break, and I found a way that you can serve again without becoming a citizen. And not to mention, the thing that kind of clinched it for me was my grandmother, who left Poland before the war, but she said to me after I returned from Israel, she said, how will you, meaning my generation, remember what happened to our people when her generation's gone? And that stuck with me, thinking, here I am, I want to do something for the Jewish people. I was thinking about joining the U.S. Army and having a career as a lawyer. That kind of went by the wayside. But how can I not fight for the Jewish people and for the state of Israel when I am capable of doing so now, and we have an army that can protect us?
Wow, that's interesting, because the store of your grandma is the one that they're capturing there at that Yad Vashem. And when I went, a couple of times, but one of them, it really struck me how they said that pain is still so real, even though it's so long ago, that they can't get people still to talk about it. And so they're having trouble getting collection.
Right, it's very true. And I want to pause on that pain for a second when we come back to about October 7th. But so I found a way to join the Israeli military, and one thing you realize is there's a whole bunch of educational, cultural components you go through in the military to learn about the history of the Jewish people, the history of the state of Israel. And we always say that Israel does not exist because of the Holocaust, but the Holocaust happened because Israel did not exist at the time. And so that is a through line through every Israeli soldier. And one thing I always say is, I wasn't just there defending the Jewish people, I was directly defending all of Israel's citizens, which includes Arabs, Christians, Muslims, obviously, and in fact...
Which a lot of people don't know, that it's such a diverse society. We hear just little bits of news, and the propaganda from the left is so loud that they try to make it seem like these are oppressors and there's an oppressed people, and they don't realize. I remember one of my trips, I saw one of the army that went into the forces, the IDF. She was darker than me with a big old rifle. She was like 17 years old. I'm like, oh my goodness, and she's Jewish. She was doing what they do. After high school, they go into service. They don't go to college.
Right. My service was it was a fairly standard service in that I tried out for the paratroopers. So despite having a healthy fear of heights, I still wanted to jump out of planes. But I had more Druze commanders than Jewish commanders. And Druze is kind of a sect of Islam. So these guys are Muslim, but I had more commanders that were Jewish, just incidentally. And to your point about there's many Ethiopian Jews who are now Israeli that I served with. People from all over, effectively all over the world.
You had to come back very changed then. And this is now moving you, this is way before October 7th.
Right.
So you already had a change occurring to say, who am I, why am I here?
Right.
Tell me about that day. What happened inside of you?
Certainly, just real quick, between those two major events, I served for 3 years as senior advisor and spokesman for Israel's mission to the United Nations.
Oh, yes,
so I
that's
also,
right. You
So
did,
I also
that's
developed more of a high-level international policy experience as well. So when October 7th happened, I mean, we woke up to all of the push alerts from different WhatsApp groups and news sites that we get, and reading it, thinking something's happening, but not really appreciating until you literally turn on the news what's going on.
We work related, or you have wife and young baby?
My wife and I specifically, but frankly,
and you're like, what in the world?
The Jewish community writ large. People, or even people who woke up that morning seeing the news, not really realizing what's going on, those outside Israel.
With a brand new little baby.
Yes,
and you're sitting there saying, what's
going on?
What's
I'm
going
getting chills right now remembering reading the news.
I cannot imagine. I mean, most people that lived through 9/11 remember exactly that moment as well. So I can imagine, because this was the 9/11 moment, if you will, in Israel. And although there have always been these little hit and misses, this is, you better take us seriously, or we're really going to do the whole from the river to the sea thing.
Right.
And so something must have come alive in you after having served with them, after having served a couple of ambassadors.
Absolutely, and I'm in a position now here where I live just outside Washington, D.C., to be able to use my voice and my experience to explain to American audiences, Jewish and non-Jewish, to congressional leaders, to different corporations, on tactically what's happening in Israel, and more from a geostrategic perspective, what are the implications for the region and for U.S. security. And I view this now in the general sense, similar to the reason I served in the IDF, is Israel is on the front lines, and we're seeing this very clearly right now. Israel's on the front lines of the same evil forces that come to the United States, that are attacking the West overall. And that was one of the reasons, again, I served, because I wanted to be on the front lines of that. But since October 7th, and you mentioned the pain that the generation that endured the Holocaust, they're still experiencing. I tell audiences I speak with that whatever the calendar might say today's date is, for Israel and many of us in the Jewish community, it is still October 7th. And whenever you are thinking or you're reading about what's Israel doing, you're trying to analyze, you have to remember that it is still October 7th for us. And granted, Israel's security situation, particularly in the war effort in Gaza against Hamas, is going very well. So we're in a much better position against Hamas than we were 3.5 months ago. But still, from a psychological perspective, and this is going to take a long time to unpack.
Well, of course it is, because there are still hostages, and there's so much pressure now from outside groups saying, stop, cease.
Ceasefire,
no,
right.
You know what? I was talking to one of my colleagues here at CURE. I said, actually, it would be over the minute they put up a white flag and say, we surrender.
Hamas has to do just 2 things for the war to end tomorrow, today even.
Yeah.
Release the hostages and surrender.
And
That's
surrender.
it.
That's it. So it's not fair for Israel to continuously be blamed. Your grandma, she's still on this side of eternity?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
so, and is she near enough that you were able to discuss October the 7th?
Yeah, it's a little bit
some of the
to the
things
extent.
that she's probably just not the conversation for right now.
No.
Probably brought back her whole life, but she's got to be proud of you. Just know what you've done. Tell me a little bit about that, because we have to go back to the panel.
Sure.
And I got to pull your professional brain. I
Yes.
just wanted people to know you personally, because this is real. I have a friend who, after October 7th, she didn't know what to even think about, and then she blurted out. She said, "I don't even think I know anyone Jewish," and I'm pretty sure you do. And she said, "No, I do not. I'm like, "Well, how do you know you don't?" And we're all rethinking now.
Mm-hmm.
What has happened to all of us as a result of those that are in and out of our lives that we think we know, but we don't know at all?
One thing the Jewish community, at least in America, is looking for right now are our allies to step up and stand with us. And it's been shockingly silent for many people, many communities that we thought were our friends through peacetime, and now in wartime, where are they? And I'm not saying your community is one of them, but I would say for your audience out there, for those who do have Jewish acquaintances, just reach out to them and say, "I'm here, I'm thinking about you and your community in Israel." Just reach out for a further conversation.
I think that's beginning to happen. In fact, the right here on Capitol Hill, the Israel Advocacy Day,
Yes.
2 weeks,
Yes.
this all came together. I was part of the planning process, and we were doing all of that. We thought maybe 20 rabbis, 20 pastors, and several others joined together just to say, we're locking arms, and then went to Work the Hill to just meet with different representatives. In 2 weeks, 30 representatives.
Yeah, that's
Said,
a wonderful showing.
Come, tell us all that you're doing. So I think it's already beginning to happen. And you mentioned in my community, the Christian community has always had this love for Israel, but I think that this experience has taken it to a whole new level. Like you just said, you got to start now thinking about what that means on a personal basis. But in the African American community, it's a split right now.
Right.
Even though the Jewish community was with us through the civil rights movement, the social justice warriors have narrated this thing out to say, you're natural infinities on the side of these Palestinians. How dare you be a part of saving Israel from what they're doing
There's
today?
so much aligning that could align Israel/the Jewish people with the African American community.
I think it's going to happen.
That it is really a disservice to your community if somehow people co-opted to believe that the Palestinians, for whatever reason, are actually their natural allies.
That's right.
Certainly, the Palestinians as a political entity versus just the people themselves. Nothing could be further from the truth.
Right.
So I hope certainly that.
Elaborate on that, because we've got another minute. I want you to elaborate on
Sure.
it, because this is a very important point. Because even during the time of Dr. King, when the Jewish community was there, working and walking with us, there was this element of black life that had gotten with the Nazis, the same thing that the BLMers are doing with the Marxists, with the socialists, and they were constantly warring against Dr. King's movement, including then another element of the Muslim community.
So
we're doing that same thing
so
during that time, that
right.
this is your natural affinity. How dare you mainstream with these Europeans?
To try to put a bow on it, so what is Zionism? You hear this word Zionism a lot.
Yeah.
Zionism
They
is...
call me a Zionist.
And
I just say thank you. I don't know what it is.
I would say thank you as well. I mean,
Okay.
in short, Zionism is the belief that the Jewish people have self-determination in their homeland, so in the state of Israel. And
Then
that
I am a
idea, that
Zionist.
key point of self-determination is something that I think every community that wants to have their own, to be their own agent in their own story, to control their own destiny, that everyone can look to and aspire to and learn from as well. So there's a lot to be, and not to mention also the religious aspect and historical significance of the Jewish people returning from Exodus, coming to Israel, and then returning after 2,000 years and wandering
Which is a
back.
hope for the Christian. You know, when you think about the scripture, your Torah, the Old Testament is we're a continuum
Correct.
out of, and the Apostle Paul even speaks to us a couple of times in Romans when their tensions started rising, saying, "How dare you? You're like one of the branches grafted in."
Right,
So
right.
you're going to talk about the root. So there are many places that we need look and self-correction. And this, those are horrible tragedy that has happened. I think that it's opened that opportunity, like you and I talked about the other day when we finally met, that to build those bridges. So I'm so glad that you were able to join me here on Cure America and let us get a personal side of you. But we got to go back to the panel now and professionally try to sort through the noise of this news so that we can find some truth about what are the next steps. What should we do? The Israelis are saying this is going to take a while, and they are not going to cease fire without getting to their goal. And there is, as Daniel just pointed out, opportunity to end the war tomorrow if they would just put up the little white flag and let the hostages go. So we're just not going to accept the other side of the narrative that says that Israel's a bully in this. So let's go back and talk on the panel for a minute after this important message. Well, my panel's back to sort through the noise of the news so that we all can find truth. We have Daniel Flesch with me, I have Richard Manning, I have Jonathan Alexandre, and I have Marty Dannenfelser. And guys, this is a go for it because we've heard a lot, and we know that Israel's in our heart. We know that there's been many other things that have happened here in Washington, D.C. that we may need to get to later on because you had some thoughts about where we are in the Middle East and if we're going to be pulled into wars.
Well, I think we are in danger of being pulled into wars. I think we're in danger of being pulled into wars because Joe Biden has exhibited extraordinary weakness and has changed sides in the Middle East. He's gone from being, Donald Trump set up a southern wall, essentially, against Iran's aggression. It was under the Abraham Accords. It was changing the dynamic and the idea that all settlements to Middle East problems have to go through the Palestinians who want to drive Israel into the ocean. Let's be clear. They do not accept an Israel.
River to the sea. We keep hearing it over and over.
So that's just true. No, and so the change is trying to get an actual solution where people have common interests, are able to get along, trade, and become actual allies, making it so they're less reliant on us. Right. So that's
to Richard's point, funding stream going back to the Iran, and that was reopened under Biden, but also funding stream going to UNRWA, which United Nations having something like 10% of the fighters in Hamas that went in on October 7th have ties to UNRWA, have ties to UN funding. Quite literally, we're funding that. It was a Biden administration.
Explain to people what that is, because this is catching a lot of people off guard. Well, usually when you think about the humanitarian aid and the wonderful things that we do, you think that they're wonderful things that we do, and this is like a terrorist arm.
Yeah, UNRWA's...
So UNRWA is the UN agency that's dedicated solely to the Palestinian refugees. There's another organization called the UNHCR, High Commission for Refugees, that deals with all other refugees around the world since World War II. Okay. UNRWA is just for the Palestinians. And there's a few key definitional differences. One is, under UNHCR, if you leave your homeland because of war, violence, etc., you are a refugee, but not your descendants, and they try to resettle you or repatriate you if possible. Under UNRWA, not only are your descendants, even if you adopt children, but your descendants and descendants are in perpetuity refugees, and there's no effort to settle you somewhere else permanently. So that means in 1949, at the end of the Arab-Israeli First War, the War of Independence for Israel, there are about 700,000 Palestinian refugees. Mm-hmm. Now there's over 5 million. And this organization...
They're still refugees?
They're still classified as refugees. And this organization, to the point about the news this past week, is this organization perpetuates the conflict, particularly in Gaza. There's about 12,000 UNRWA employees, half of whom have ties, either direct or indirect, to Hamas. About 12 of them, if not more, that we know about, directly participate in the October 7th massacre. About 1,200 of them support Hamas in other ways as well. So this is an organization that's intricately entwined with Hamas.
They got to be pulled up out of there. Marty, when Nikki Haley was the ambassador under the Trump administration to the UN, she tried to point to some of these challenges with the UN, and I think President Trump went as far as to say maybe we should just disband this thing. Have they just been exposed for picking sides that they're not who they had been chartered to be or said that they were going to be? This sounds like a fraudulent group to the core.
Yeah, Haley proposed that they defund UNRWA completely.
I'm talking now about the whole UN. Yeah. Maybe, but go ahead.
Well, no,
she had proposed
I think to the point that Daniel made is we have to look at Israel first, and the Palestinians do not want to recognize, certainly Hamas does not want to recognize the existence of Israel, their right to exist. So Israel is not the problem here. And the whole idea, they had what amounted to a Palestinian state in Gaza, And then they turned over the governance of it to Hamas. And Hamas, of course, is trying to wipe Israel off the face of the earth.
So that means that there was really no good intention behind even Israel having pulled up out of Gaza to say, here, you want to stay, here's go do it.
And there was so much tension in Israel when that occurred in 2005, because they literally were moving Jewish people out of their homes and saying, all right, Palestinians, you can have this entire place. And from that time, tens of thousands of rockets yearly flowed into the southern half of Israel, not to mention an attack like this that had been prevented up until this point, but because of the weakness certainly that occurred here in our administration, the opportunity that evil sees when we do have a weak American administration, you see attacks like this on October 7th. The danger, there's so many headlines we can go over, but the danger is how much of that we're going to repeat here in the United States when we're still arresting and releasing terrorists on our southern border, and we're still allowing so much infiltration here on our southern border. All the fingers point towards a Biden administration that is derelict in their duty, completely weak in defending, and it's not just hurting us, it's hurting our friends, our closest friend abroad in Israel as well.
This is crazy. Richard, you mentioned the Abraham Accords, and I think that, one of the things that I'm struggling with, especially as a Christian, is to say, we know that evil's there, we know that good is there, and we know that man has choice to choose. What is broken down that they won't choose? We're finding out now that this little UNRWA they're part of the propaganda machine in their schools.
If you're building things along the lines of a Judeo-Christian concept, that construct, which is how we see the world, is difficult to understand how other people see the world. And if you try to apply Judeo-Christian concepts and precepts to other people around the world who are not Jewish or Christian, you end up with, it's impossible to understand how you can come up with a solution where you send money for humanitarian aid and for concrete and other things to build infrastructure to help people be more successful, have more ability to get water and the like, and it gets used for tunnels to be able to just go and attack Israel.
But nobody there knew that they were building these tunnels.
No, everybody knew they were building
tunnels. Well, then that's my question is, are they just destined to evil, or is there someone that can rise up and speak truth into
God
this?
God is sovereign. No one's destined to evil.
Well, then why won't somebody rise up and tell?
Well, we did make incredible progress during the Trump administration, showing that evil was going to be met with equal force. We did put a stopgap against.
So that's part of a key component.
Yeah,
just like making your children behave.
Exactly.
It's having to speak.
And I would argue that the change in Saudi Arabia is fundamental. This is the place that has both Mecca and Medina in it. And Saudi Arabia, their willingness to work with Israel in some ways, there's passive, but some ways, shows that there's a pathway forward. A pathway forward where all the sons of Abraham can get along and can survive. And so, but that's a pathway forward that's different than continuing the conflict over Israel with people who refuse to accept Israel's right to exist, refuse to accept that the Jews have a place in their historic homeland.
Okay, I want you to speak into this because some are saying that because that was on the table and in heavy discussions right before October 7th is why we had October 7th.
So that's partly true. I think historians 2 years from now will write a more complete history of what happened on October 7th. But in the Middle East right now, there's two paths going forward. One is exemplified by the Abraham Accords. It's a path of looking to the future, realizing that Israel is not the problem, but the solution in the Middle East. And Saudi Arabia is a great example. The UAE and Bahrain and Morocco are the three countries with Israel part of the Accords. Saudi Arabia is continuing to normalize with Israel. It's not off the table. In fact, the Saudis are doubling, if not tripling down. But that's a path forward of solutions for the future. The other path is one of essentially destruction, evil, exemplified by the Iranians. And what the countries, other countries in the Middle East, and even the American people here need to understand is this is not just a war in the Middle East, it's a war for Western civilization more broadly, and we need to decide which side we're on and which side we're going to support.
Well, we're hearing from some that are on the other side, and they're sitting legislatures, and so we have many of those discussions. So I'm wondering now then, what is the Christian to do? I don't want to change the subject, even though there are other things happening here, but to this subject, one of the other things that's happening here is that Senate bill. That Senate bill has put Ukraine, Israel, the border and the Pan-Pacific together, and yet it's stalling out. It's just like dead on arrival. You know, Reagan, I think, did you mention Reagan? One of y'all mentioned Ronald Reagan, that, you know, he said 80% of something is better than 20% of nothing. And I'm just wondering, are we missing an opportunity to get a little bit done to keep us on that path toward a peaceful Middle East?
Well, I think the other countries that are in full advantage of our dereliction of duty in the Middle East are China, that's looking at us, and Russia that enjoys what's going on. Russia that is engaging with us in Syria as we're speaking. Part of that bill is just fundamentally restocking the amount of arms that we gave to Ukraine. So part of that comes back to the Pentagon, it comes back to defense contractors. And I think a little bit of that is necessary. I think the Ukraine situation in Russia, sort of a knee-jerk reaction, and so part of that funding will just come back to the Pentagon and our own forces to restockpile things that we've shared there. I think that's a necessary aspect of it. Of course, the support for Israel, that money needs to get there, the $14 billion, and we can't untie it, of course, from securing our southern border. Propositions that have come out from the Senate that I think Speaker Johnson has called dead on arrival.
Right.
It's a 30-year problem that may not be, it certainly hasn't been fixed in the last 9 months that we've been working on it. It may not be fixed within the March 1st to March 8th timeline. But the conversation has to be had again towards defending our border, defending our national security interests at home, and then defending our international interests abroad. And until we get an administration that's willing to do that, that's willing to listen to the American people, that we want security home and security abroad, we're going to keep running in circles.
So, or do we wait, Marty, or do we move some things forward now until that election time? Because this is intense, and it seems like the longer we wait, it could get even worse, especially after we're looking at the face of 3 dead soldiers.
Yeah, I mean, with the whole situation with the border, there's now conflict between the Republicans because Senator Langford has been negotiating on behalf of the Senate Republicans to try to do something on the border. The problem with the border is Joe Biden doesn't want to enforce the border. Joe Biden got rid of all the protections at the border. He has plenty of opportunity to fix the border. But the question is, the Republicans did pass one bill called H.R. 2, which would really force the issue, to force the border to be secured.
So they could just take that up if
they
the
could.
Senate,
well, they have taken that. The House has already passed that.
The House has, but the Senate.
The Senate is refusing to do that.
This is just politics now, and people are getting hurt.
So now the question is, well, do you get as much as you can get to try to force Biden to do as much as you possibly can through bipartisan agreement? And this is just kind of in a quagmire right now.
And I know you have thoughts on this, Richard, but we're not going to have time. But so I want to just ask you a question, because we are in election season. How did we not see this? You just defined a President Biden, a Joe Biden, that walked into the White House with a whole lot of issues with a whole election integrity. But how could this have not been exposed? This is not just some derelict in duty and I don't know what I'm doing. This sounds very deliberate, not just over there in the Middle East, but on our border.
We did know that this was what was going to happen. It's largely what the election of 2020 was fought over. But but all this is a continuation. When Barack Obama said, right before the election in 2008, we're going to fundamentally transform America. The border, the insecurity of the border, 8 to 10 million people coming across, many more that we don't know about, is about fundamentally transforming America. The attack on our founding fathers, the attack on our basic liberties, is about fundamentally transforming America. And this election is a battle, this upcoming election is a battle for the soul of America. And if we don't understand that and behave like it is truly an existential battle about who we're going to be as a country, if we don't figure that out, the other side's figured it out and they're going to win.
But then how is it that so many haven't figured it out? Is it because transform sounds good?
It's hard because it's hard to imagine that an elected leader
what you said,
will sit there and would actually seek to do damage to your own country.
But and especially if you come from that Judeo-Christian thinking process, as you said, surely they can't be that evil. I would never do something like that.
And the key thing we have to do when we're dealing with people who don't share values is actually listen to what they say and believe them.
Wow. Okay. Well, we believe them, and we're going to have to continue this discussion next week because that clock is run down again. You know, here on Cure America, we are sorting through the noise of the news to find some truth, and I think you heard a lot of truth, guys. Thanks. I mean, so I'm even going to have to listen over and over again to get some of this intel and insight into me and into my heart, so that I can break it down real simple for my friends, because it is an important election. And Daniel, thank you. I hope you'll come back, because what you've shared with us is incredibly important, and we really need to know these things in our audience here at Cure America. So God bless you all. Keep the faith. It's really dark outside, but that's one of the reasons that I have a regular habit of just reading a proverb a day to keep the devil away, and also just to keep you strong in the things that God has said. And one of the things that he has said is that the conclusion of the matter is fear him and keep his commandments. And if each and every one of us do that, that's all we really need to do to make sure that our country, our culture, and our communities survive to find truth. So God bless you, and I'll see you again next week here on Cure America.